Hi, my name is Robin Wong, and in this video I want to share some tips on managing very challenging dynamic range situation when you are shooting with your Olympus OM-D cameras. Let's do this! Unfortunately, I have to film this video indoor because it has been raining cats and dogs in Kuala Lumpur for many days. I just can't wait for the rain to be over, so I just decided to shoot everything indoor. And this particular topic, dynamic range, I've also done a recent shoot in an indoor environment at the Kuala Lumpur Performing Arts Centre, KLPAC. It was a stage show where a group of young people came together and shared their songs, stories, poetry. It was an amazing show. I was privileged to be able to shoot that show, and it was a particularly challenging shooting environment because it was a stage environment with harsh stage lighting. Therefore, dynamic range proved to be a challenge. I'm sharing certain tips that may be applicable to you on how to manage the execution part of the shooting, as well as post-processing tricks that can salvage some very tricky dynamic range situations. I fully acknowledge that the Micro Four Thirds image sensor does not have the best dynamic range in the industry. Larger format cameras like full frame cameras, they definitely have much better dynamic range. Having said that, being a professional photographer that have been shooting with Olympus OM-D for many years, I have never encountered a situation where the dynamic range in the image sensor of my Olympus OM-D was not sufficient to deliver satisfactory results. Therefore, I'm sharing as much as I can in this particular video, but before that, I have also shared tips on how to maximize dynamic range from an Olympus OM-D camera. I'll put the link to the video up here. Please check it out if you have not done so already. This video, I'm going to do things a little bit differently. I'm giving you real life examples, and I'm going to share what I did in that particular real shoot that I've just done, both during shooting as well as post-processing. This particular shoot that I did was exceptionally challenging for a few reasons. It was a low light environment with stage lighting, and the stage light shines on one particular individual on the stage surrounded by other people, and sometimes I need to balance the light that is very bright on one person against the others that are actually in almost complete darkness. We are talking about dynamic range difference about 5 to 6 stops between the main person that is under the harsh light versus the others that are in the shadow. What makes things a lot worse was that it was an actual performance, so the main performer is constantly moving. So because there's a lot of movement, you cannot use tricks like HDR or take multiple photographs to merge them together to get a composite image with wider dynamic range. That is just not possible. So everything is done with a single shot because I need that one particular moment. Remember, being on stage, decisive moment is very important. Therefore, shoot raw so that you have the maximum dynamic range that you can capture within a shot. And within that one raw file dynamic range that you have captured, you should be sufficient to salvage enough details in the highlight and shadow region. I'll share how to do that a little bit later during the post-processing stage. Now, knowing that you're coming into a low light environment, there are certain subjects that will be in the shadow and you're dealing with constant moving subjects on stage. It's a performance after all. Then it is very important to use bright aperture lenses. I'll highly suggest using prime lenses, f1.8 lenses like 75 f1.8, 45 f1.8. If you can't go near, then you may want to use the Olympus 40 to 150 f2.8. For this particular shoot, I was mainly using the 40 to 150 f2.8 for the reach because I can't get too close to the stage. And I found that the f2.8 was enough to give me the flexibility to work with the stage lighting versus the dark environment. Now, it is very important that you watch your shutter speed. Do not let the shutter speed dip too low because there's movement in the subjects. Bump up the ISO if necessary to get sufficient shutter speed to freeze motion. Having said that, I have also always tried to maintain as low ISO as possible. I'll try to maintain as close to 200. ISO 200, you get the best dynamic range. You can squeeze the file as much as you can, but that's not always possible. Sometimes I need to go up to 400, 800, or even more than 1600 when the lighting dips much lower. It doesn't really matter. The important thing here when you're shooting stage is to shoot the moment first. And while you're doing that, in whatever shutter speed that you use, whatever ISO that you use, make sure that your image is not severely overexposed or severely underexposed. When it comes to exposure, it's very hard for me to tell you what to do. It's not just, oh, don't overexpose, don't underexpose. Every situation is different. You have to judge that particular situation individually, because in certain situations you have to protect the highlight. To do that, you will try not to overexpose the image, so you intentionally underexpose your image. Or in some situations where there's too much shadow and you want to see the details in the shadow, then you will intentionally overexpose the image. But whatever you do, don't severely overexpose, underexpose, because when there is highlight clippings or shadow clippings, it is just that much more difficult to retain or recover the details. The post-processing software that I use is Capture One Pro. It doesn't really matter which post-processing software you use, either it's Adobe Lightroom or anything else. The basic functions are the same. Now I'm going to start with something more basic, something that just requires very easy tuning. It doesn't require a lot of work. Let's see this particular singer here. There are a lot of harsh light on the face, plenty of highlight and shadow, and this is just one singer with a very dark background. We don't really care about the background, but he has a white shirt, and I've exposed this rather correctly to not overexpose the shirt, and the camera is doing a great job balancing the highlight and shadow here. But I just don't want the shadow in the eye and the cheek area to dip so dark. So your best friend here will be the highlight and shadow adjustment. If I were to lift the shadow, you can see that easily the area that was dark in the eye, you can see details there already. I can also increase the exposure to make it a little bit brighter, but now by doing so, the bright area is also getting a little bit brighter. To balance that, I will pull down the highlight so that it is a little bit more balanced. I can also just reduce the brightness just a little bit so that it looks a little bit more balanced. There you go. In comparison to before I adjust the highlight and shadow just now, this was how harsh the light was, and after adjustments, it is looking a lot better. This was before and this was after. Next, we have a photograph of a performer which is under the bright spotlight, surrounded by other people who are in the shadow. Though we can still see them quite clearly, they are not in complete darkness. So all we have to do is just perform, again, simple highlight and shadow recovery. I'm just going to boost up the shadow. Immediately can see everyone around him very clearly. Then I will decrease the highlights to preserve the highlights on the pants. The main performer seems to be a little bit warm because of the light, so I will decrease the Kelvin, the white balance adjustment, so that the skin tone appears a little bit more natural. Then I'll increase a bit of contrast and minus a little bit of brightness. That's all I want to do. The main performer himself is supposed to look a little bit brighter. The main subject appear perfectly sharp. This clearly shows what a raw file from an Olympus OM-D is capable of in terms of dynamic range retrieval. Alright, moving on to something a lot more challenging. This dude here, you can see the harshness of this lighting, the dynamic range. This is quite a big challenge. Thankfully, I shot this at ISO 200, so I don't expect a lot of difficulty correcting this image. Now, the main performer himself, the guitar player, is already overexposed. Let's see how much I've overexposed him. So this is perhaps about the right exposure. So he's overexposed by 1.5 stops. That is a lot. If I want to see the people around him clearly, I will have to then bring up the exposure, then I will bring up almost 3 stops to see everyone else around him, and the main singer is gonna be even more overblown. That's gonna be a big challenge. But because this is at ISO 200, I have confidence that I'll be able to create a balanced output. So first, I'm going to increase my exposure so I can see everyone around him. I'll increase the shadow a little bit as well. I will not touch the main singer now. Then I will go to layers. This is where you can make a difference by creating a new layer. I'm adding an adjustment layer 1. Then I will use a radial filter. Now this radial filter is just for the main singer. I just want to cover him from his head all the way to his shoes because his shoe is white. So I don't want the shoe to be overblown. I don't need it to be so wide. Then I will invert the adjustment, invert the mask so that the adjustment is on the singer himself. Here I will decrease the exposure. You can see this selectively just decreases the exposure of the main singer. Then after that, I will decrease the highlight so that the skin is a little bit more balanced. Right. And after that, then I'll increase the shadow so that you can see here it is more, you can see more details in the legs, the microphone and everything else. You can see it's more defined. Alright, pretty much that's it. That's all I want to do with the main singer. At the same time, everyone else around him is still looking pretty bright. Now I go back to the main adjustment tab. I'll just increase a little bit of contrast, decrease brightness, decrease furthermore highlight, increase a bit more shadow, and expected because I've increased about 3 stops or more in the shadow region. If I were to inspect this shadow area, again, it's going to appear a little bit grainy. It's not a big problem. All I have to do is just increase the luminance, noise reduction, and it will smoothen out any graininess that's around here. And since I shot this at ISO 200, I'm not too scared of chroma noise, so I can decrease the color noise reduction and still maintain a little bit more detail. Everything looks pretty good so far in this image. Now let's go to before adjustment, where the main singer is overexposed while everyone else is severely underexposed. This is about 5 to 6 stops dynamic range difference between the main singer and everyone else. And after adjustment, everything else looks pretty much balanced. I can see everyone else very clearly, and the main singer is not overexposed. That's all I have to share about how to squeeze the best dynamic range out of Olympus OM-D in really challenging situation, especially in the example that I've given on the stage photography. If you found these tips useful, please consider buying me a cup of coffee, where you can contribute directly to my PayPal account. I'll put the links in the descriptions below on how you can do that. Any small contribution can go a long way and help me to make similar videos and publish them right here. If you've enjoyed watching this video, please give me a thumbs up. Please consider subscribing to this channel if you've not already done so, and I'll see you again in the next one. Until then, please go out and take more photographs, and always stay safe and take care. Bye-bye.